like to call the Budget and Finance Committee meeting to order. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting? We have a motion and a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Very good. Thank you very, very much. For the record, we do have all members present. Going back to the old agenda, we have two items. First item would be the adoption of our annual budget for fiscal year 2019 and declaring an emergency. And we got to spend 3 or 4 nights here and had a lot of questions. And Mr. Fricker, anything additional you'd like to add?
No, I believe that we've responded most to the questions that we've had. If there are any additional questions, we'd be happy to answer those. But the budget before you is the, as was submitted on the first Monday prior to the budget hearings, is the budget that we intend to submit.
Very good, thank you. And by the way, thank you. Looks like we're a couple $100,000 ahead this year on our income tax receipts, so that's a good thing. So, questions or comments? Yes. Ms. Amobian?
Within the list of organizations that we have membership, do we have membership in the Ohio Municipal League on that list?
We do not. When that ordinance came in, it was explained at that time we would not be rejoining because we did not see the benefit from that organization.
Well, I want to differ with that. When did that come in?
I want to say it was probably February, but I'm sure we could look it up. But again, it came in already for adoption, and the question was asked on the floor.
And this is the first year that we've elected not to join?
I believe that is correct. It's the first year that I can remember.
I'd like for us to revisit that. And the cost is what, if you recall?
The cost is north of $13,000. Again, right now, there's no money in the budget for that.
Mr. Neal.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I mean, this would be an item that comes up in the special meeting portion. And my question is, who made the decision? Since the Ohio Municipal League is an organization of best practice for the legislative body, and since council is a separate branch of government, I mean, I don't think we would go to the judicial branch and say, you know what, you don't need to be a part of the Ohio Judicial League, or I don't know if the finance department is a part of the Ohio Financial League, or if the police department is a part of the Ohio Public Safety League, or if the mayor is a part of the Ohio Mayoral Association. I don't know if you consulted anybody in council, but who made that decision on behalf of the legislative body that it wasn't beneficial?
So I would say that we all made the decision because we submitted legislation for sure that did not renew our membership of the Ohio Municipal League. That is the administration's feeling. We've had we see, as Director Miller-Dawson said, very little value in what it brings to us. It, in fact, has been on the opposite side of certain issues, including the disagreement we've been having with the state over preemption legislation on 5G technology. They have a different opinion than that of the Ohio Mayor's Alliance, which represents the 30 largest cities in the state. However, we submitted legislation to council to decide whether that was to be ratified or not. So we definitely submitted legislation and made the case that we did not believe that it was worth the cost, and then council ratified that by passing that ordinance.
Well, you know, I wouldn't say council ratified. Council took, because I questioned it. I asked, why were we dropping out of the Ohio Municipal League? I mean, think about it. This is the body that lobbies on behalf of all cities with our state legislator.
But again, you did question it. I answered the question, and council passed the legislation.
Yeah, but that's if I may say, probably ignorant of the total impact to this body and to this city. I mean, there is a reason why there is the Ohio Municipal League. That's just like, you know, we have differences of opinion within the political party, but you don't leave. You work within the party. And so, again, my question is, this is a separate branch of government. And when you said we made the decision, it seems like the administration made the decision for council. Because, no, outside of when you brought the numbers here financially, and again, I don't think members of council here understood. I mean, sometimes majority of the things that are brought before us, if you look at legislation that's brought before us, is based on trust. Sure. Have even been asked at times to just trust us in this, correct? So here's one that was brought to council, and you made a decision to remove this legislative body from its best practice association. The administration did that. Council had no dialogue outside of the financial cost of that.
Mr. Councilman, I respectfully disagree, only in that I know, and I'm asking if Holly and Sarah can pull that piece of legislation. I know that legislation listed by name the associations that the city was going to be a member to. We had a discussion, as you've identified, as to why the Ohio Municipal League was not on there. We talked about it, and then council voted. If council wants to appropriate the funds for Ohio Municipal League, it can do that, but by no means was there an effort on the part of the administration to circumvent council, which is why we brought legislation with the names identified, and we talked about the Ohio Municipal League on that day.
Right, and at this point, I mean, we're discussing something that we passed, and
Mr. Chair,
the argument is, you know, that maybe it was done in ignorance. Might be just a bit degrading, no, but it is something that we did pass, and it's something that because we passed it, it's not included in this budget.
Mr. Chair, we have not finalized this budget yet. This is why we have these discussions. And when I said out of ignorance, when you are unaware of something, you're ignorant of it. It's not, if you want to take it degrading, there are plenty of things I'm ignorant of.
Okay, we don't need a lecture on the word ignorance. I understand what you said, but at the end of the day, this council voted not to be a part of the Ohio Municipal League. It is therefore not in that budget.
Mr. Clerk, I'd like for you to please read the letter that we received from the executive director from the Ohio Municipal League, who, when we were in D.C., he reached out to myself, Mr. Somerville, as well as Councilwoman Tara Samples, who's not here.
Yeah, I'm not sure that order can be made of the clerk, that this be read in necessarily.
Well,
I'm sorry.
It's in the agenda for the special meeting, but since this is writing into the subject.
I'm just going to ask, and, you know, Chair, you can do as you wish, but again, this subject is listed on Mr. Neal's special meeting request, so we can save that for that time and move on with.
Okay. If it's on the 3:15 meeting, we'll continue the conversation then. Okay, do I have a motion on this piece? Motion to approve. Second? All in favor? Opposed?
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes.
Are we approving the budget that we're going to discuss at 3:15?
Yes, on committee.
Yeah, this is the committee's approval. It'll come before council as a whole this evening.
Yeah, but can you delay the decision? So
No, we just approved, the committee approved it, then council has to approve it this evening as a whole.
Yeah, I know that. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right, our second item here is an ordinance to make...
vote.
Wait a minute, what's the
vote.
vote? Call for the vote again, if you don't mind.
Oh,
I can
okay.
roll call if you want.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Oppose.
Okay. Take a roll call.
Roll call, Freeman.
Aye.
Keith. Milkovich. Hope. Amovian.
No.
Passes committee 3-2.
Okay, next, our next piece on the old agenda is, excuse me, the ordinance to make the annual appropriation. for current expenditures, other expenditures, the capital outlays of the city of Akron for the fiscal year ended December 13th, 2019, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the annual appropriation that goes along with the budget resolution. That was the previous item.
Okay, very good. Questions or comments? Mr. Neal.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just had a question, and excuse me for being ignorant of how this works. But my question is this. In the paper, it was documented that all cities throughout the state are getting less funding from the state. The Beacon had reported somewhere in the neighborhood that our shortfall would be about $12.5 million. The Plain Dealer reported that we were going to get $6.5 million less in funding from the state. Which one is it, please?
So the $6.5 million is specifically fund. When you add into that $6.5 million, the roughly $4 to $5 million we've lost from the inheritance tax and the approximately $2 million that we've lost from the phase out of the tangible personal property tax, then you get to that higher figure.
Okay, so in regards to just what we received from the state last year and what we will receive this year, the difference is a shortfall of $6.5 million?
No, that is related to the total phase out that has happened since 2011 for those.
What is, because you know, it was in the paper earlier that the county cut their administrative staff and cut some other people because they had a shortfall. Barberton talked about them cutting their budget by cutting staff because they had a shortfall. Are we receiving any less money this year than we did last year from the state?
Our local government fund will be approximately the same amount that we got last year.
Okay, so unlike the county, unlike some of our sister cities around us, we have not lost anything in local government funds compared to last year.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? Mr. Hardy, you had a few comments. Oh, Mr. Swirsky, I apologize.
Mr. Swirsky, turn on your mic, please.
In previous years, there were some serious cuts to the local government fund.
Yes.
To our share of it. Do you have
So
any
we used to get approximately $14 million a year back prior to the recession, and we now receive about $6.5 million a year.
Okay, thank you.
All right, other questions or comments? Oh, Ms. Sims?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is this advancement on the upcoming funds or some current funds?
I did not hear your question.
So for this piece of legislation, are we asking for advancement on this budget, or?
This is actually just appropriating the 2019 budget.
So we haven't passed,
We have to pass it by state law by March 31st. This is the last Monday before March 31st.
okay, so this is for 2019,
Yes, it is.
the one we just passed out of committee.
This is for 2019.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think maybe there've been some other concerns.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we can address that now, or if the committee wants to vote on this piece, we can do it afterwards. It's up to you.
Do I have a motion? Motion for a favorable report and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Roll call?
What was that?
Take a roll
Okay.
call.
No, that's fine. I'm just, I thought I heard a no. Okay. Freeman.
Aye.
Keith. Milkovich. Hoke. Mobiet. No. No, okay. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Hardy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Before the committee adjourns, I wanted to give Director Rice and Ms. Snipes an opportunity just to brief. I know that there were some questions throughout the budget hearing process about the diversity program that they've been working on. So if it pleases the committee, at this time, they are prepared to make a briefing.
Okay, who are we going to hear from first? Mr. Rice?
Director Rice?
Okay.
Good afternoon to the committee. The City of Akron, through its Department of Human Resources, is going to begin using a intercultural development inventory as an assessment tool to train our workers and as well as some other folks in the goal is to increase the capacity of employees to better understand culture and develop cultural responsiveness and appropriate strategies for engaging in cultural differences. This tool was developed in conjunction with Leadership Akron, and over 30 people across the city have been trained to use this tool, and we can tap into the people who have been trained to help us train employees of the city of Akron in this very, very important education, okay? So quite frankly, we're going to be having 30 people we can train for this, and we're going to make this available, this training available to Department of Human Resources, some members of the police department, some all our M-level managers, and as well as we can make this training available to City Council if they so desire. Myra Snipes is one of the qualified administrators for the program. She will be heading up our cultural development inventory and our cultural diversity training. If you have any specific questions about how this is going to work and about the instrument, she'd be happy to answer them for you.
Thank you. Ms. Keith?
This can be answered by either one of you, but is this the same program that we discussed at the budget hearings? Yes. Okay. And when do you expect to implement that?
We're going to begin second quarter 2019. In fact, as Mr. Rice stated, over 30 community leaders have been trained. Just last week, I assisted the Akron Public Schools serving as a qualified administrator, or better yet, a coach. And what will happen is that each participant would be asked a series of questions, and the results, you would meet with someone like myself to explain the results. From that, each participant will develop what we call an intercultural development plan. And what that may look like, how can I improve or become more educated? Maybe I will read a book or attend a cultural event, okay?
Yes, Ms. Amobian.
Here are the questions I have. I know everybody is doing inclusion and diversity. Do we have an overarching diversity plan for the city? That's one of the tasks as the new diversity and training manager. Phase 1, beginning this second quarter 2019, will start using this instrument. This would be like a prerequisite. You receive the training, which would talk about unconscious bias. So this is all inclusive. In addition, everyone who participates will walk away with a source. The book is titled "Ouch, That Stereotypes Hurts." So that's one of the tools to help people to better understand dealing with cultural differences and similarities.
I think, quite frankly, this is going to be the building block that we will use to develop a plan.
Yeah, I realize when you're doing an assessment, you are trying to find out where people are. It's a snapshot in time. Then that helps you move to the next level of how do you help people address areas that you're finding on the instrument after you do the aggregate assessment. That's where someone such as, like I said, the best way is a coach to sit down with you individually to explain the results and to start a plan. And as the administrator, I will use that information if necessary based on the group dynamic to customize it. But essentially, we will have a program citywide. Training cultural diversity has been offered over the years, but I'm proud to say through this administration, this will be a program citywide that all will receive, so we all receive the same message. Did anybody from Human Resources go to NLC and participate in the real training? Because I know that a lot of cities are adopting that.
To answer your question directly, no, that's not the case, but our office has done a lot of research with regard to what the National League of Cities is doing in cities like Fairfax, Virginia, and in, what was the other city? Wisconsin. Yeah, Madison, Wisconsin. And we're taking their best practices, and the plan that we are developing is basically mirroring their best practices to move forward.
And how they rolled it out?
Absolutely.
There was nothing in place before you rolled out the assessment tool?
Yes, there's definitely have been programs over the years with cultural diversity. We had a program called Valuing Differences in Work.
Oh, no. I'm not talking about the activities you've done and the work that you've done. Do you have anything like a strategic plan?
That's what we're going to be working. That's part of the...
You're developing that?
Yes, part of the goals, and as we stated, starting second quarter, we're going to start with our police, and as I stated, administration, and we extend the invitation for council members to be a part of this.
Yeah, I hope we take you up on it, because I think it would be helpful to us. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much.
I think there's another question.
Oh, Mr. Neal.
Thank you. I believe this presentation is in light of my request that was emailed per the budget chair's request 2 weeks ago, stating that we needed to set aside in the budget money for racial equity training so that the city could move forward on developing a racial equity plan. Now, please remember, as I said, racial equity, never did I say anything about diversity. Diversity is totally different than racial equity. Totally different. This has been a discussion that has been tried to be had between council and administration for over 3 years. There is a difference between diversity and equity. There's diversity, so to speak, we think, if you just look on the surface inside this room. But is there equity inside this room?
Okay.
There's a difference. So what I want to say is, one thing for everyone's, there's a beautiful documentary on BET running right now. It's called Finding Justice, that speaks directly to this matter that we're talking about. You know, pretty much we use the term diversity because we don't want to talk about what the real problem is, and it's race.
Okay. Well, I'd like to answer the first part of your question directly. This is something that the Department of Human Resources has been working on for the past 2 years, and the appointment of Myra Snipes as our diversity and training manager was one of the final steps in us to develop this. We do understand the differences between diversity and inclusion. I think we're looking for an environment that acknowledges and embraces inclusion, okay? But I don't want to leave this body saying that this is just a knee-jerk response to what happened 2 weeks ago.
No,
this is something that we've been working on for the past 2 years.
I'm saying that this presentation is in regards to my request. Look, I appreciate what you're doing, but as Ms. Snipes mentioned, the city has had a diversity program for a while, but it does not reflect itself in our policy. It does not, we still don't have an understanding of what percentage of minority businesses we do business with from a vending standpoint. Now, we're getting that information, but if we truly had an equity policy, that would be in place.
And let me speak to that. I have I don't have a sense of what happened in the city of Akron before January of 2016. I can understand and appreciate your position, but quite frankly, what we're trying to do is build the building that takes this city where we want to go.
And hopefully you've seen my email communication with, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on Miss Annie's last name, but if you've seen our communication, my communication with Mr. Hardy. Let me just be frank. Even the way, if you look at the most recent thing that took place in this council chambers, where members in this committee spoke about a piece of legislation that was just sitting in committee in regards to moving the primary. We talked about how inequitable that policy was, the way we wanted to change it, how it adversely impacted certain segments of our community. I didn't even think of those who were physically challenged, how it would impact them, how we talked about that. But was there any concern, anything taken in place? No, because, you know, when we come to understand truly what is needed to bring about equity and address inequitable institutionalized practices, which are government, economics, religion, and education. Now, we got the Elevate Akron report that told us about the economic inequities that exist in our community for years. Those can only be supported by government practices.
Mr. Neal, I'm going to have to stop you at your 5 minutes.
Mr. Clerk, you know what?
I have to stop you at your 5 minutes. Is there another committee member that would like to speak?
It's time for us to go into special meeting, so I'll hold it for then.
That'd be best. Any other comments or questions? All right, we still have one new piece. There's a piece that says a resolution approving and confirming the appointments of Anita Davis, Larry Polis, Stephen Kaut to the Akron Local Board of Tax Review and declaring an emergency.
Again, this legislation is to appoint the 3 people that you named, and it's required as part of Ohio Revised Code and part of our city codified ordinances, Section 104.16. The board would hear any of the appeals from our citizens regarding city income taxes. We're asking if we could put this on consent.
Okay, questions or comments? A motion for consent. Is there a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second for consent. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. If nothing else to come before us, if we could please, we will have...
Mr. Chairman, I've raised my hand twice in the back on 2 separate...
I'm sorry,
that's okay.
Peripheral.
That's okay,
Please.
thank you. So this was to the previous piece, if you don't mind. I do appreciate the work that's being done around the issues of racial inclusion and more sensitivity around the issues of race. But as a part of the discussion during the budget hearings, I also inquired about a plan around gun violence for our city. As a result of that we would also get a presentation as to where we're going in that direction.
Okay.
In the budget, to my surprise, and I shared that also with the chief.
I think we have somebody that, I didn't know if we were holding this for 3:15 or we can...
He's here now.
Okay, we'll go ahead and address it now. We have somebody to speak regarding actions we're taking when it comes to gun violence in the city. Mr. Brown, thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, my question was not, we heard a little bit about what we've done already. My question was to what resources have we earmarked to specifically address various elements related to gun violence, i.e., how we're getting at the proliferation of guns in our community, where it's coming from, how are we supporting our young folks to try and interrupt violence, and how are we helping to reintroduce peace and tranquility to a city that feels a bit on edge with the summer looming. Over the weekend, I have talked to several elders who are quite concerned about even coming outdoors. This morning, I received calls from a few folks from across the city concerned about exchange of gunfire of young folks while kids are at bus stops and as they're working in the garden in the morning. So I appreciate, and I shared with Mr. Chair, with the Chief during budget hearings, that I appreciate what we said we've already done and the fact that there is some reduction in crime, but I wanted to know what is our plan and resources that we have earmarked to get at the issue of gun violence going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Brown?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak about our plan and some of the things we've done around gun violence. Our school resource officers are working with young people to prevent and interrupt violence through the relationships with students and staffs. There are several examples of SROs, or school resource officers, who recover guns, thereby preventing violence, and those officers are a part of our budget. Our police, community relations, and neighborhood response teams speak to the community at block watch clubs, talking about violence and how to report suspicious behavior. We also give them tools like gun locks, home inventory pamphlets to record their valuables and illegal firearms, which helps in the recovery and enforcement process. We have mentoring programs such as the NAV Project, working with young people, teaching them leadership skills, self-esteem. And those officers are in the budget, and we also have reserve officers who are volunteering. And then we also have full-time officers who are also volunteering. We participate in something called Safe Kids Coalition with Children's Hospital and other partnering agencies to address overall safety for children. And that information or those resources are reflected in the budget. We have investigative units and federal partners working on intelligence to prevent and interrupt violence, also in the budget. Our patrol units have enforcement activity recovering just last year over 800 illegal guns, thereby preventing violence. Our patrol units enforcement activity is also pushed or driven by the intelligence that's given to them by our investigative units. We also have a grant proposal with Northern Ohio Violent Crime Committee that has Youngstown, Cleveland, help me out, who else? Toledo, some of the major cities in our city, around our city, to have more of an inclusive plan to reduce the violence. And that means that we're going to be working with community groups, church groups, and the like to talk about what we can do collectively to reduce violence. We also have, behind me is Tamika Rose, and we also have a youth violence committee that was started by this administration a year or two ago, maybe. So we're still working on those things. And I would gladly meet, or have our leadership team in the police department gladly meet with anybody who wants to unpack those a little bit more. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Sims?
So, Mr. Chairman, that's not quite exactly what I was looking for. As you know, I was part of the group that really brought the emphasis towards dealing with gun violence to this administration, and we began to launch the work around the Coalition Against Youth Violence. What I'm asking us to establish is a bona fide plan for how we get at gun violence. What I heard were piecemeal pieces. You know, one thing I know, and I realize we need all hands on deck, and I think we're working to do that each and every day, but we need resources. We need to know what the plan is, where our treasure is, that's where our heart is. And so I'm asking us, because the city, the folks living in our neighborhoods are looking for us to lead. What I've heard you say was, here's an hour here, and here's a few things here, but I'm looking honestly for a bona fide plan to say that we've set up and we've earmarked these kind of resources to address this issue. What I do know is, even when we talked about the Narcan, I asked the chief in June of 2016 if we could put in, that we would have tasers as standard issuance, that we would have first aid kits in our cars, along with Narcan. That didn't happen until the community said, we'd like our officers to have Narcan. We had that in 2018. In 2016, in August of 2016, we had a plan for that. We started putting together groups to interrupt the epidemic once we've used Narcan on the individual, to have them go in so that we can try to put a halt to it. We did that, and we were intentional about that. We had resources set aside about that. We identified partners, and we knew what everybody's role was. But we don't seem to know right now is what people's roles are or what the plan is to interrupt this.
Okay, if I can just kind of follow up one more time. I said that we do have a plan, and any member of this body and around this horseshoe can come sit down. We can talk about as many pages, and we'll be glad to share. I shared some highlights, and we're willing to share more. And I have no problem meeting with anybody around this horseshoe to talk about in more detail what those things look like.
I submit this with all due respect, Director Brown. I love you and I appreciate the work that you do. But this ain't about a love fest. I had a bullet come through my kitchen window and hit my refrigerator. When I wake up in the morning and the first thing I say to my husband is not good morning, but did you hear that last night because it sounds like there's a war in my neighborhood? I need a plan. Not one that I need a plan that I could share with the community. I need us to be talking about our efforts, intentional efforts, to deal with this issue. Our elders, our young folks should not feel paralyzed in their neighborhood. That's all I'm saying. Now, I've tried to talk to folks behind closed doors. I've had this conversation openly. That's why we're having it again. We're about to pass a budget, and we don't have anything intentional relative to a plan to deal with the issues of gun violence that I can really look at and read it and say this was our intention. That's all I'm saying to you. And it's just that we need to do that.
So, Councilwoman Sims, I understand and respect your passion on this issue. I just respectfully disagree with your assertion that there is no plan. As you know, you were a participant on the steering committee for the Youth Violence Prevention Plan that was rolled out only but a few months ago. In this budget specifically, as we've talked about many times around this horseshoe, there are numerous line items that go to implementing that plan, things like midnight basketball, things like an increase in recreation, things like the largest investment in police and safety services that we've seen in a long time, thanks to Issue 4. There is a plan. It's available. Tamika, yourself, others have worked tirelessly to put it together. It identifies, specifically to your point, the roles and responsibilities of each community partner, including the city, in terms of how we are going to achieve that goal of a 20% reduction in violent crime amongst our youth, particularly ages 15 to 24 by 2023. That's our next 4 years terms if we're all lucky to still be here. So in the next 4 years, it lays out a plan systematically on how the community can come together. There is a plan. It shows up in multitudes, not just what Deputy Mayor Brown said, but also in places like the recreation budget. So I want to respect, and I do respect your passion on this issue. I just respectfully disagree that there is no plan. There is a plan. It's written. It's available. I will make sure that every council member has a copy in their mailbox today before the 7 o'clock meeting. But we are definitely working towards a systematic reduction in specifically youth violence to try and move the needle in our community.
The realities are, Mr. Hardy, and I'm sorry that you respectfully disagree, but Got Gun will travel. This is just not an issue about young folks and violence. This is about me driving down Copley Road when a war breaks out. This is about me sitting in my backyard and gunfire and people jumping over the fence with full automatics. This is what this is about. This is about what plan do we have to help restore the peace, the sense of peace and tranquility to the neighborhoods. Matter of fact, the plan that we currently have is now going to be, I believe the leader on that piece is going to be Summit County Public Health. I'm asking us what we are doing as a city. I'm asking you to work with me and hear me, because it's not like I haven't sat down with you and several other folks about a plan. To have these pockets of ideals is good. Can we figure out a way to pull it together so that we can allay the fears that are in our community, because they're real, and not we put $30 over here for 3 officers or $10 over here to make sure we can buy some. And I'm not minimizing, but I'm saying if we're really serious about this, there should be a plan that says reducing gun violence in our city, or whatever it is, and there'll be monies earmarked to do that. And how you disseminate those resources once that plan is done is a whole nother story. If it exists and you have officers that you have designated to deal with this issue, let us see that in a plan. That's all I'm asking you for, is a plan, not just the one. I've been fully engaged in the plan to reduce youth violence. Matter of fact, gun violence took a back seat to every other kind of youth violence in the report. Although gun violence in our city changes our community's social DNA, its impact is devastating.
Mr. Chair.
So in response to that, Mr. Chairman, again, I was a part of all those conversations. We talked as a community group about how to attack youth violence. No one here disagrees with the fact that this is an issue in our community. We also have to recognize we live in the most restrictive gun control environment that this country's ever seen. There is no gun control. And we are living with that. We cannot, this body even, cannot pass common sense gun legislation because of the preemption at the state and federal level. Everyone is committed to trying to get at this issue. I guess I am just struggling with your assertion that there is no plan when there are millions of dollars in this budget dedicated to improving and getting guns off the street. And correct me, Deputy Mayor Brown, I think we achieved more guns, legal guns off the street last year than ever before. We are committed. There is a plan for youth violence reduction that was generated by the community. We just facilitated it, and you're right, it is going to be led by Summit County Public Health because, as you've said many times passionately on this floor, gun violence is a public health issue. We can't solve it ourselves, but we are doing our part throughout this budget, part of that plan, to try and get at this issue that is, no question, a difficult one.
Madam President.
I just see...
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. May I ask a question, please? Are we in the special
No,
meeting? Are we in
no,
the
we're
budget?
still in the budget meeting. We haven't left the budget meeting yet.
Might want to adjourn.
Okay.
Can we adjourn and go to the special meeting, since this is what is, all this is covered in the special meeting?
I want to come back to Mr. Hardy for a moment. And Mr. Hardy, you do make a point, and I don't know if we strip the activity out of every budget when it comes to this issue, but just as I look at our committees, the items we're talked about, they're touched at Health and Human Services. These things are touched in public safety, probably touched in planning as well. Park and Rec, we know it's touched there. We know it's touched in housing. So I understand. I understand the desire to say, okay, show me the plan. When in actuality, I think what I hear you saying is, well, the plan is it's over here. There's a piece of it in this committee, and there's a piece in this committee, and there's something over here in housing that we think. And I don't know how we. If we do already have that all drawn out to where you take the activity that's in 7 or 8 different committees that have to do with gun violence and safety of the community as a whole, but it's been my sense. I know we haven't done a gun buyback program or anything like that, but it's been my sense that there has been a pretty concerted effort, and
Mr. Chair,
I just kind of rue the day that we hear it said there is no plan, because we've had legislation come through, not just in public safety, that has dealt with that. And I don't want to deny the administration or Deputy Brown of any of that. Mr. Mobian.
Here are 2 examples that we've talked about before. We keep saying these things are public health issues, but they don't fall under the Health and Social Services Committee, which is where they should be, where we would be getting ongoing reports on these kind of issues. This is a very serious issue. We shouldn't be treating it lightly, because Mrs. Sims is not the only one who's hearing about the gun problem. I live in Northwest Akron. I sleep in my bed. I walk in my ward. I don't have the same concerns as a lot of other folks are experiencing. So we need to treat this as an Akron problem and put it where it should be. If it's at the Summit County Health Department, it should be under Health and Social Services, where we have an overarching plan, where we have dollars attached to what we're doing, and we have regular reviews. Those things that we review and monitor are those things that we do. I have found for years, if you want something done, you monitor it, you review it, and you have an ongoing process. And whatever we have that's piecemeal in all these various departments, it should be in one place where we can see where all these various departments are doing different kinds of things, the dollars that are connected and associated with. So that is, I think, one way to address it. The same thing with drug abuse. Drug abuse is a health and social service issue. We need to have things that come under the right division where they're being monitored and reviewed on a regular basis. Now, if you're monitoring my time, sir, I can tell you I will stop. Only thing I want to tell you is that we keep talking about these issues and we keep doing things the same way we've always done them. And until we start changing how we review things and monitor things down here, we're not going to get the kind of information to the public that we need to get to them. Things need to be done in an orderly fashion so we can actually show people reports of how we're doing things, where the reductions are happening, how much money we're spending doing this, the kind of resources we have dedicated to all the various activities. I don't have the same problem in wards 5, 3, different parts of the city that some people have. But these are real concerns and real issues that we need to address in an organized fashion. I hear exactly what Mrs. Sims is saying, and I think we need to listen to what she's saying. If I had a bullet coming through my wall, and I'm sure it happens a lot, we changed Edgewood because of all of the violence over the years. So we can do better than we're doing in terms of getting information out and reviewing stuff with the public in terms of our activities that we have associated with each one of these items that you've identified. It needs to be in an organized fashion. Thank you.
Mr. Hardy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to prolong the committee meeting any longer, but I just want to say again that how council reviews the information is council's purview, but I categorically disagree that we are doing things the same old way. I'm very proud of this budget. All of us that worked to put it together, this very CRATE team that worked to put it together, and then we had budget hearings to talk about it. We are trying to move the needle on some very systemic issues. So I definitely believe that we are not experiencing the status quo. We are doing things differently, and we're trying every day.
Thank you. I just remind everybody, we're 35 minutes late for a 3:15 meeting, so. Ms. Sims.
So it's unfortunate that we would look at semantics to impose a sense that we think that you have been derelict in your duty. It has nothing to do with you as much as it has everything to do with us and in being intentional about a plan. I work at a funeral home. We can talk about reduction in crime, steal my car any day, but don't tell me my baby ain't coming home. And so when I deal with this, and so don't tell me we can't be a little more thorough and clean about what resources we have available and how we're going to use that, and assuring once again the community that this is important to us as a city. I'm asking us together to figure out how to do that work, not say, or put words in our mouths or try to switch it to think that we're not honoring the work that's been done and your due diligence around the budget. What we're saying is something seems void, and a real plan would be that something. One that I can clearly see and share with those folks who phone me nearly in tears talking about the issues of gun violence in their community. That's all I'm asking us to do. Not indict you for being neglectful, but just to say we haven't done this good enough. And we need to do that. We're about to pass the budget. What a great time to figure out how to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And that very last comment would indicate that we've not figured out a way to do that. And Ms. Sims, I have to say that, you know, I'm hearing from the administration for doing this, this, and that, and as much as you want to say everything you're saying, with all respect, the last comments do smack somewhat of, well, we're not doing the best job that we could.
You can take that any way you want to, Mr. Chairman. I'm bringing to you what the people say to me.
And I understand that.
So it's not an issue.
The administration.
I didn't indict the administration, nor am I indicting you. I'm telling you.
And this gentleman has told you time and time again, yes, there is a plan in the budget. If you can decipher that plan, great. If you cannot, that's fine.
I'm going to ask you, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask you to respect my opinion, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm asking you to respect my opinion.
I'm going to ask everyone around the horseshoe to respect this chamber. Okay, we do have a chair. Councilwoman Sims, please, okay? You have a chair of a committee. We are in Budget and Finance, and so I'm going to ask you to allow him to do his job and run this committee. Chair.
If we can call the meeting to order so we can get on at 3:15.
Yes, sir, that's what I was going to ask, because it's unique that everything we're discussing is outlined on the agenda for the 3:15.
Okay, well, we can move it into the 3:15 then. Do we have a motion for adjournment? All in favor? Aye.
Special meeting will start in 5 minutes. Hello. Okay.
There's probably more, you could go ask Sarah for one. Wasn't your name on it?
I'd like to call the special meeting to order in 2 minutes, please. Special meeting to order in 2 minutes. I'd like to call the special meeting to order for, that was scheduled for 3:15. We're running slightly behind. Would you like to read the roll, please, Mr. Clerk?
Okay. Freeman. Here. Fusco. Here. Hoke. Here. Tabor. Here. Key. Here. Kilby. Here. Milkovich. Here. Neal is here. Amobian. Samples. Sims. Somerville. Swirsky. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know the three are in the back having a conversation. They'll join us when they can. I don't want to delay this meeting anymore. The purpose of this meeting was, Mr. Kamer, I agree. I understand we have a quorum. I understand they should be here. I don't know what they're working on in the back, but the special meeting was called at 3:15. I don't want to delay it any longer. The purpose of this meeting was to discuss some city budget priorities that were discussed earlier in the budget hearing. And it was because out of my concern that during the budget process, I did not see identified dollars to address the issues as outlined in this agenda for the items that we'll look at today. And so I'll just go right down the line in regards to what's here. The first one is pertaining to an email that was sent out on March the 12th, I believe it was, per the request of our budget chair, that if we had any questions concerning the budget, that we email him. I happened to be in D.C. at that time at a National League of Cities meeting, and what was sent out was a request for the city to establish, for us to work with the administration and set aside funding for racial equity training for both council and administration, and to develop so that it would help us develop a comprehensive equity policy for the city. Now, during the last budget meeting, there was some conversation about diversity, and how diversity, when you talked about diversity, you were also talking about equity. I sent out an email just to give people an understanding. If you look at, it says why diversity and equity and inclusion matter. What didn't come out in this email was a little cartoon that makes it easy for folks if they don't want to read. And I'm not being funny, I'm just being honest. The cartoon explains, to give you an idea, the difference between diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I'll explain the cartoon. The cartoon is, you have three people that are at a baseball game, standing behind a fence. They're all at the baseball game, but one is in a wheelchair. The other one, the person is just short. The other person's tall. They all have, and one is black, one is white, and one's a woman. So you have diversity. You have, if you want to say, equality, because they're all at the game. But you don't have equity. Because of the fence, they can't see. So that's the cartoon that goes with this.
The cartoon came through an email.
It came through in the email?
Yeah, it came through
okay.
an email.
Yeah, I'm looking at the printout that was done.
Oh, okay.
It didn't come out. So, I mean, I say that because, you know, there was much discussion with passion about, when we talk about diversity, we're talking about equity. That is not true. And if you follow the email that was shared 2 weeks ago, you'll see that this discussion has, out of respect for trying to just come to an understanding, has been going on with the administration for over a year. To help us come to an understanding of the need for a racial equity policy. Now, racial equity policy, but an equity policy, period. So the first question in regards to budget priority, Mr. Chair, in the email that I sent out, was a request for $35,000 for racial equity training for both council and the administration, with the ultimate goal being that it leads us to developing a racial equity policy. So I had emailed that out. I hadn't got any questions. Again, the reason for this call is for us to place it in the budget. I don't know if Mr. Hardy or anyone wants to speak to that, to this point, but I believe we all know how important the Elevate Akron report is, and what it means, the ramifications that it means as far as the health and growth of our city. I think the Beacon Journal is doing an excellent job in even highlighting even further some of those concerns in yesterday's paper, and they'll be doing that throughout the month of April. So for us, so that we can have an understanding of what it means to develop an equity policy. And like I said, the healthy discussion in the last meeting showed that there's a misunderstanding even amongst the body and the members on council and administration of the difference between equity, diversity, and inclusion. I see you shaking your head, Mr. Rice. You may have an understanding, but it's definite that we don't have an understanding as a collective body, because the policies that we put in place, the procurement practices that exist, the lack of inclusion that we hear every day, that we're down here on a Monday, from people who want to have an opportunity to do business with the city, that we don't have something in place that is inclusive of the diversity in our community, so that it provides them the equitable access to economic opportunity here. So, council members, and I have to be honest, I would love to hear from some of my colleagues the majority of their constituents may not come down here and ask for help from the city to have equitable opportunity to do business with the city, or to have equitable investment in their community. That's the reason for the first item on this agenda, which is for us to establish a racial equity policy so that this council, lockstep with this administration, can develop a racial equity policy that will help us address the issues outlined as they are in the Elevate Akron report. So I'll open it up for comments.
And Councilman Neal, actually, I'm going to run the meeting, okay? It's been brought to my attention I'm supposed to be running the meeting.
Madam Chair, out of all due respect, whenever someone calls a special meeting, they chair that meeting. Now, I know we try to switch it in the past so that we can control the process, which is, again, another one of the systemic problems that we have down here.
Okay.
If there's a problem with the way I'm running the meeting, I'll take, but since I was asked to call this meeting.
Absolutely.
Because I did ask the chair to call it. I did ask for us to caucus. I asked several times before this for council to even have time that we set aside so we could put together a strategic plan to address these issues. But I was asked to call this meeting, so out of all due respect, I would like to be able to chair the
Thank you,
meeting.
Councilman Neal. Just 1 second. You did call the meeting, and you went through the appropriate channels to do that. So now we're going to allow our law department to tell you the rules in terms of who runs a special meeting. Do we have someone from the law department who can give us that information, or a representative?
Sure. As the council president, you do run the special meeting. It is your prerogative to give the floor, obviously, to any individual, including the person who called the meeting, but it is practice and the rule that the president does run special meetings.
I understand the law department just read that, but again, precedent always over supersedes, and it's been our precedent that whoever calls a special meeting runs it. But, Madam Chair, if you'd like to run this meeting, you know.
Thank you. So we are on item number 1. Is there anyone else that has any comments or questions as it relates to the racial equity training? Any other further questions or comments on item number 1? Councilwoman Sims?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't hear all of the conversation, but I'm hopeful that is something that we're really looking at very closely. You know, part of even our legislation talks oftentimes about equity. It's very difficult to hold ourselves accountable to accomplishing that goal when we don't have a definition. Now, I understand just talking to the multiple groups in the community as well as this administration and this body, everybody has a different definition for what that is. But I think if we make an intentional effort to define that as a collective, and part of that would be earmarking resources to be able to do that. So I hope that the thoughts around this finds favorable support around this horseshoe in particular, but as a governing body of the city overall. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Any other comments or questions? Councilman Amobian?
In addition to that, I know that we have often requested information for us to see what we are doing in that area of doing more business with minorities, and we can't seem to get any kind of report that would show us what we're doing. I know during the budget hearings we talked again about the Urban League doing something regarding the CSO project and giving us some information about that. It's hard to figure out if we're making progress or if we're doing anything of substance in that area unless we monitor it. I go back to the one thing that I have learned in life. Those things that are monitored are those things that get done. And if we cannot get information and reports on a regular basis to show us what we have done and what we are doing in that area, we're never going to get off the dime. And Urban League can't do everything that we need for them to do unless we can see what the plan or the agreement that we have with the Urban League and the dollars that are assigned. Because last time I spoke with the former executive director, they weren't getting enough money from us to do the various things that I thought they were doing as a part of the job that we were asking them to do. So that is what we really need, is information that will come to us on a regular basis to tell us how many African Americans are working on the CSO project, as an example. How much have they gotten in terms of a contract? Are they being paid? Because those are the things that we hear from those subcontractors, is that they're not getting the work, they're not being paid, and, you know, on and on and on. Unless we can see something in writing that would tell us what's happening, it's hard to know what is going on. Thank you.
Councilman Deal, did you have, Councilwoman Samples.
So I have some questions and a little concern about the number one that we're on right now. And as far as it states that council would undergo racial equity training for council and administration. Unless it's going to be offered as like a COE, like continuing education, I'm just trying to understand. I'm trying to be as sensitive as I can here, the point, because my issue is we had someone from the University of Akron come in for free. Half of council didn't even want to show up, and we were supposed to be trying to mend fences and have a better council and how to work together, and half of council didn't even show up till it finally got to the point where we weren't even having meetings anymore. It just stopped. So, I mean, if it's something we're going to do and be serious about it, I'm all on board. But if it's something we're just going to do on the surface just so people think that we're all down here getting along and really care about mending some racial issues, but really not, then I'm just not understanding what's the point if people aren't going to be serious about it.
Thank you. I think Councilman Neal can speak to that.
Yes, Madam Chair. As was outlined in the email that I sent out, the suggestion was that National League of Cities, Race, Equity, and Leadership team, in conjunction, there's several groups that they work with, and I have been communicating with the administration about those groups and the racial equity tools that they provide will come in and do the training. Because the goal is, if we do not have a policy, we have nothing to guide us by and direct us by in this. And so National League of Cities, a body that we pay membership to, which has a training facility, and they partner with these other groups about racial equity training, showing us how to, one, looking at our areas, practices and that we have in place, and help us to form a racial equity policy by which to govern ourselves by. So this would appreciate, and all I can think of is Bill, the work he did for us, but Bill Lyons, but I understand your concern, Councilwoman Samples. This would not be that case. This would be formal training. Mr. Rice had spoke about, they had looked at what they had did in other cities. Those other cities are examples of cities that went through the training that National League of Cities Racial Equity and Leadership team provides. That's what we would go through.
Thank you. Councilman Fusco?
Yes, thank you. I assume we're still standing. We had heard this afternoon what the administration has been doing, the direction they're going. They offered to council the training that all the city employees will be undertaking. And I stand here, I was part of the Bill Lyons and all those discussions. I know I can learn more. I'm more than happy to attend more and learn more and become a better community and make sure that we have equity among all of the citizens here in Akron. So I certainly recognize that. However, though, as I mentioned, you know, instead of going with the National League of Cities, we are hearing that our very own city has put together a strategy and a plan and a training plan as well. And I would submit we should do that first.
Thank you. Councilwoman Sims?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So earlier we heard, and I appreciate HR's kind of explanation for what we were doing. We were building something. We don't have a complete plan we're building. On many occasions when we come through here for a construction project, there's this line item for the planner. You know, we already know what we're going to do, or what needs to be done, but we set aside resources to get at the core of it. I think that's what we're asking for here, and I concur with my colleague. I don't want to do the whole showboat thing either. I want us to finally really get at a pure definitions that will lead us as a city about what do we mean when we talk about equity. Because I know my definition is different from other people's, even around this horseshoe. The fact of the matter, and we had real passionate conversation just a little earlier, is that we have a city report about our city, the city that we all profess to love, and the great American city, where by all accounts, a third of its population has been left out of the most crucial element of living in a city, and that's economic development. And so we go around this circle and we talk about all of the things that are happening to certain parts of the city, and we act as if those don't correlate or have any connections to economic development. So when I look at gun violence in our neighborhood, I do connect that to economic development. When I look at infant mortality of 44320 and 4430607, I do connect that to economic development. When I look at some conditions of our school systems in certain communities, I do connect that to economic development. So to think that we should just leave that to itself or to an effort that is just beginning to build itself, I think is a failure on our part. I think that we have to be intentional and on purpose about defining what this is so that we can liberate a third of our population so that they can too begin to experience what it is to live in a great American city. I know we haven't, you know, this is all a part of being a leader, I think. We have to deal with some tough issues. Not only the tough issues that are happening at the national level, but are happening in our city. We're talking historic, unilateral exclusions of certain segments of our population, and we're going to leave it to somebody. We're the leaders. Why wouldn't we earmark money to get at just even the formulation of a definition? So that when we write legislation and we talk about equity, we know what we're chasing. We know what it looks like. We know when we're not there, and we know when we're there. But right now, we use it, but we don't have a definition for it. So I feel as urgent as I did about earlier today. We have to get at the inequities in our city. I know this ain't fun to talk about because it's election season. And but I'm going to talk about it whether it's election season or not election season, because a part of our city is hurting. And they're looking for us as leaders to bring relief. And we have to have those conversations, as difficult as they may seem. So I don't support the whole, I may show up or it's not important, let's play kumbaya, but I do support a concerted effort for us as a council and as administration to come up with a bona fide definition and to put the resources behind whatever that takes so that we're able to do that. So that's what I support about number one. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Neal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Out of all due respect, I do believe if we can spend $50,000 for surveys on, different things in our city, as important as this is, I do not believe, and I shared this with Mr. Hardy, I do not believe that within ourselves we have what it takes to do this work. I mean, for multiple years, I had been asking the law department, what is our definition of racial equity? What is our definition of inclusion? I couldn't get an answer. I've been in conversation, I've had emails, I'm still waiting on response to emails where I've sent examples of racial equity tools that we could use. I was asked to supply those. I supplied them over a year ago and still haven't gotten an answer. And so to now think that the city, we are in a position to do this difficult lifting, I believe we need to use an outside service to assist us. So that's why this request was brought in. The full outline and detail of the request is in the email that was sent 2 weeks ago. I asked colleagues to look at it because for me to support our budget as it comes to there has to be some definite, and again, this right here is asking that we set the money aside. We may choose a different entity to lead the training after we do the work where we come and sit down and discuss it. This is the other sad thing. We haven't even had the discussion. The fact that we still operate in silos, and the request for the discussion has been made, because I know, because I've been making it myself for over 3 years. So, Madam Chair, the request is as it has come in, is that $35,000, as it was outlined in the email that I sent, be set aside for racial equity training by this council.
Thank you. Mr. Hart, did you have something in response to Councilman Neal?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I just, for council's purposes, want to let folks know, and many of you do know, but as part of Elevate Akron, we have a community-based working group that is working right now with the Brookings Institute, one of the nation's leading think tanks, to develop what we're calling the inclusion narrative. And what that narrative is at the end of the day is a shared definition of the problem, who's being impacted by it, and what we're going to do about it. As part of that process, we will define, as a community, not just for the city, we will adopt it. Hopefully, this body will adopt it, but we're working collectively to not just have a collective definition as a city, but a collective definition between the chamber, the city, the county, and the community. That is ongoing, and to Councilwoman Sims's concerns, we share them. We agree that infant mortality is an economic development issue, which is why the mayor hired the city's first ever health equity ambassador, which is why we are spending a considerable amount of time, effort, and yes, money in the budget to combat infant mortality. We've had a 9% reduction, but we have a long way to go. We agree, and I just, for the purposes of council, I didn't know if everyone knew that shared narrative, that shared definition is underway as we speak, and there's community, grassroots, grass tops together working to develop that.
And just before we move on to Councilwoman Mobian, Mr. Hart, if you will please stand back up at the mic for just one moment, because Councilwoman Mobian spoke earlier just about the efforts of increasing and supporting minority businesses, and so I know that there is a piece that is being done, and I would like for you to share that with council.
Yes, ma'am. Director Miller Dawson would be better at explaining it than I, but I know that in the budget we have a line item for a contract with the Minority Business Assistance Center located at the Urban League, but the MBAC is actually a state program, and this is what they do. They assist communities not just in the supplier diversity realm, but also in the community side to get more people bonded, more people understanding our bid process, also to help us to change our bid process if we need to. So that contract is in the budget and will be coming forth shortly. And in fact, I believe that law has the contract right now, and so we're close to executing if we haven't already. And I was remiss in also not saying that the city in this budget is also funding $100,000 as part of the budget for the new VP of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion at the Chamber, which is a huge piece. Again, I'll use Director Rice's terms, building the foundation, building the building that we need to move forward. So our piece is 100, the Chamber's putting another 100 in, and we'll consider obviously additional resources as that individual needs.
Thank you. Councilman Mobian?
My real question has more to do with, we learn about what's happening, but we haven't come together as the leadership of the city to develop an overall philosophy that we all agree to and aspire to, and then to talk about those pieces and parts that we will be reported to on, so that we know that work is being done and what is being done. And to talk about all these things that are happening and we find out after the fact, it doesn't help us when we look to the leadership and we don't clearly understand where we're going. Because when I talk to the Urban League, and I haven't talked to anybody recently, and asked for specific information, they were not tracking that information for whatever reason. So I don't even know what's in this agreement that's being adjudicated or whatever you're doing with it at this point. But part of what I see on this paper is a request for the council and administration to come together and develop an equity policy, or even just talk about it and leave it up to somebody to develop the policy after we talk about where we would like to go as a city. And if we're the leadership of that city, those are the two entities that should come together to talk about the direction we want to go. Right now, everybody's talking about diversity and equity, and this person's doing this and this. I don't even know what that means and what that's telling us. We don't get any reports, and it's hard to figure that out. But this, to me, seems like we need to start with a philosophical definition of what do we mean in terms of where we want to go as a city when we talk about equity, diversity, inclusion, and all of those things. In the end, how do we want to elevate Akron? How do we want to include that 31% of our population that have been excluded from economic opportunities? You know, to talk about the strategic plan that's been developed, that's fine. But ultimately, it's the leadership of the city, which would be council and administration, to talk about where are we going? What is our definition of these terms? Do we agree? And then in the end, when the product is delivered to us, then we agree that, okay, this is representative of showing us that we're going in the direction that we all agree to.
Thank you. Any couple more comments just on item number 1, just so we can continue with the rest of the agenda. Councilwoman Sims?
Madam Chair, I think overall, we should all want the same thing. And even any efforts to try to help us get there so we better understand how devastating the realities of what we're dealing with is, I don't get information. It was January, almost January a year, and now a year and 3 months that I've asked the administration for the number of minorities on unbid contracts. I've asked openly in this body and I asked privately, and I still haven't gotten that information, because all we're saying, if we're a part of the creation of a report, Elevate Akron, and we found out that there's a glaring deficit as it relates to black people's being included in economic development. It seems to me that where we can lead in helping to address that or remedy that, we should be doing that. So by looking at unbid contracts would be an example of how we could do that, and how we could at least put things in place so that we are expanding or changing how we're trying to recruit those minority businesses on the unbid contracts, so that they can participate in the economics of the city, particularly in the city of Akron. And so when we don't get that information, we're left to wonder why. And so they end up coming back before us again here in this kind of format. When if we could get the information, we could address that and help you to craft at least legislation so we can get at some of these inequities. And so that would be helpful and would go a long way. But this is not anything I don't think we should be blowing past. Again, I don't want to sit around the room and act like everything is kumbaya. I want us to really get at devising a definition so that we can move forward with remedying some of the inequities that we are fully aware. And I would contend, and I don't think it would cost me too much to hedge a bet, although the report is from 2005 to 2015, I would contend that it happened long before then, that it continues today. And so the sooner we can stop this bleed, I think the better we are overall as a city. So again, I support anything that we can do that would get us to the place that we need to as a city to define what we mean about equity and inclusion as it relates to us as a city overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sims. We're going to have concluding remarks, if you have any at all, Councilman Neal, on this particular topic.
No, Madam Chair, just this. This is, again, to designate funds to be set aside for racial equity training for council and administration, so that that would lead to a racial equity policy. I respect what we've heard from the administration. The bottom line is, unless they can show us in the budget where the training is for council and for the administration to go through that will lead to a racial equity policy, these funds would still need to be utilized. And to ease everyone's concerns, we know that if the funds aren't utilized, where do they go? They go back to the general fund. But if we do not prioritize funds for our training, that would lead and set a timeline for us to, with the end result being a racial equity policy for understanding for this council, for one, and for us as a city as a whole, I think we're fooling ourselves.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to item number 2, just, respect of time and everyone else's time. Item number 2, the City Council My Neighborhood Akron City Council Neighborhood Grant Program. I don't know if Councilman Neal has anything more, but I'll go back to really what I kind of shared last week. We are at a good opportunity where neighborhood partnership is being restructured, so therefore our program, council's program, Our Neighborhood My Akron 2, will be structured as well, to be able to kind of deal with some changes there. I know that we're continually working through some of those things, and once we've worked through some of those things, we'll come back to this body and report that out. Councilman Neal?
Yeah, Madam President, for clarification, the dollars for the My Neighborhood Akron never came from the neighborhood partnership money.
That's correct. I understand that.
Yeah. So it has nothing to do with the restructuring of neighborhood partnership. These dollars were originally identified back when we were having a discussion about the amount that we were spending on fire hydrants. We identified this city gets back, and I don't know if Mr. Fricker has an answer for us, this city gets back somewhere between $100,000 to $120,000 every year in credit card rebate refunds. This council should allocate where those monies go. And when we had that initial discussion, that's where the initial dollars came from when we outlined funding for the My Neighborhood Akron grant. Now, the reason why is of heightened concern right now, as Council President mentioned, the neighborhood partnership dollars are being looked at. It's not for sure if it will be funded to the level that it's been funded in the past. So that means, like in my community, things like the West Akron Parade, the African Festival that takes place downtown. I can think of a number of organizations that engage our youth. There's no guarantee that they will be funded to the level that they've been funded in the past. So, and then just even the general funding for the My Neighborhood Akron grant isn't even outlined in the budget. This is something, again, that this is council's grant. Council identifies, finds money, and outlines the funding for it. There's nothing in the budget right now. And so the grant itself, and then in light of what we have with the neighborhood partnership dollars, is a concern that we don't have anything defined.
Mr. Fricker?
I respectfully disagree that there's nothing in the budget for My Neighborhood Akron. We've allocated the same $40,000 that we have for the previous, that we also allocated in 2018, and we had $100,000 in 2017. So there is $40,000 in the budget. Last year we spent approximately half of that money. But yet again, we budgeted $40,000 this year in the council budget for My Neighborhood Akron. So it is in the budget.
Madam Chair, and that right there highlights a great concern, because no one in these chambers on council knew that.
You didn't know what, Councilman Neal?
Excuse me. We knew the past, but I'm talking about what's budgeted for this year. When I said that we didn't have anything budgeted for this year, Madam Chair spoke about how we were waiting to find out about the the Neighborhood Partnership Grant. Mr. Fricker just stood there and told us that there was something in the budget for this year for the My Neighborhood Akron grant. Before that, no one else knew what the dollar amount was. And now this is my concern again. This is my concern again. Based on the history of that grant, and how the money has been identified before. Here we have the administration telling council what its budget is. Part of our responsibility is to make sure that our communities have what they need. Some of the concerns that we're speaking of, what's needed in Ward 3 may not be what's needed in Ward 4, may not be what's needed in Ward 6 or Ward 1. It's through that grant that we work with our constituents to give them the resources to address the different needs and concerns that are there. In light of everything that is challenging our community now, I think we need, the reason why this is here, the $40,000, it's nice to get that answer now, but I don't think that's enough funding. I would like to see us fund that grant to the original amount of $100,000, because again, if we don't use it, where does the money go? It goes back to the operating budget.
Okay, so I'm going to say again, we are currently looking at both My Neighborhood, My Akron, and neighborhood partnerships. So that's a possibility, okay? So we're looking at both of those programs so that we can continue, particularly with council's grant, to fund local neighborhood groups and things and parades and activities in our neighborhoods. So again, that might be the possibility, increasing it back up. But again, we're currently working on it, so we're not ready to present at this time. Councilwoman Samples?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So while it's being looked at and maybe restructured, residents and nonprofits are still able to apply for My Neighborhood or Akron, because I exhaust my funds every year. The last 2 years now, it's only $4,000. I know I'll just have some nonprofits who won't be able to receive funding because of, us cutting back. So I just want to make sure, because I've got some events coming up in May, and the application normally comes out in April, and I know they're going to apply for it. One of those is, Links has a big cultural festival they're doing at the end of May, and I know they're going to be looking to apply for this grant. So are we still going to be having an application available to them, or are we holding off on any of that right now? Because that changes a lot for them when they look forward to that funding every year.
At this time, we're not taking any applications either on either program. So My Neighborhood, My Akron, no applications, nor neighborhood partnership. But when we do, actually some of those community groups that you're speaking of, they'll have opportunity to even actually potentially get even more funds than they normally would to help fund their programs.
So we're earmarking the 40 grand, but we're not accepting applications? Is that correct?
I'm going to let Mr. Hardy speak more in detail of what he can.
Yes, so in direct response to that, we sent a letter out to anyone who had ever gotten a neighborhood partnership grant ever, and let them know that we were being asked by HUD and the American Community Foundation. So we also committed in that letter that by May 1st, we would be in a position to put out a revised NPP program. And to Council President Somerville's point, we've been working with council leadership to make sure that in tandem, we will be able to also at that time, hopefully, be ready to roll out the My Neighborhood or Akron, any changes to that program. So the idea is that if there's anyone caught in the middle between the new NPP program and not getting funds from it, that they could be swept up in the My Neighborhood or Akron. So from a timing perspective, what we've committed to publicly is the May 1st timetable.
But
so,
there will be funding available this year.
This year.
We're just working on restructuring right now. Is that what we're saying?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Fusco?
I guess we're not standing. So I was just going to say, Mr. Neal, with respect to you, I knew exactly what I'm voting on. So please, whenever you say that council doesn't know how much money is in the budget for our neighborhood or Akron, I know exactly what I'm going to be voting on in 2 hours and 15 minutes, and that's $40,000 for that allocation. However, though, we have not spent more than $20,000 or so in terms of our neighborhood or Akron program. Just wanted to just put it out there that I knew what we're voting on. I think a lot of our colleagues here that attended the meetings were aware as well.
Councilman Neal?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. One thing for Mr. Hardy, I would like to request, sir, that you not only send that email or that letter to those who received the grant, but also send it to those who may not been awarded the grant, because they're going to be interested in wanting to apply again too. And my concern with the, when we asked about the 40,000 is because in our council budget, where this is supposed to be, there's not a line item for the My Neighborhood or Akron grant.
Mr. Fricker, I'll let Mr. Fricker point it out to you. It is there.
It is there. This council was provided with an email that contained all of the line item detail that went into this budget.
Okay, I can get with you afterward to show, because if it was, this is not the first time I've asked this question, which has led to this being one of the questions on here. When I asked how much was outlined for the My Neighborhood Akron grant, we had a lengthy conversation just last week about how the administration was working on a neighborhood partnership, and I said, well, it's not a part of neighborhood partnership. Never was it stated that a dollar amount had been defined. And so in conjunction, yes, we can go back and pull the minutes. So in conjunction to my question, since the original funding for the My Neighborhood Akron grant came from was identified, I don't know if that's what was actually used, the credit card rebate money?
I do not recall that that was the case. The credit card rebate money, which began back in 2014, goes into the general fund just like all of our miscellaneous revenues does. It was never specifically allocated towards any program. It goes into the general fund.
And so my question to you was, and then we can move from this question, was over the last 3 years, how much was received each year in credit card rebate dollars that came back that was put in the general fund? Because technically, this council should vote on where those dollars are legislated. They shouldn't just, allocated. It shouldn't just go to the general fund, because then they're utilized and we don't understand where the funding source came from.
The general fund has such a wide variety of funding sources that includes, obviously, our income tax, our property tax, our curb service revenues, but all of those little miscellaneous items that we get all contribute to the general fund, and all are needed to fund the operations of the general fund. Our general fund is a balanced budget this year, and over the past 3 years, we've received approximately $100,000 a year. It's a little bit higher in 2017. Those dollars are programmed into the existing expenses of this general fund. It's a balanced budget. We need those dollars to fund the operations of the general fund.
Mr. Fricker, you mean that we need to tell our constituents that the city of Akron needs credit card rebate dollars to balance its budget?
That is correct.
What you're saying? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Are there any more comments or questions on item number 2? If not, we're going to move on to 3 just so we can continue the agenda. Much discussion was made at the last meeting. Councilman Neal, did you have anything further?
Yes, Madam Chair, the question was asked, how much is, to confirm how much is invested in the search and seizure fund of the city. The last meeting we had about a year or two ago, we were told $1 million. The other question was, what is being done, or what is the dollar amount coming back from the investment of those dollars? How much is coming back from the investment of those dollars each year? So that we can look at allocating those funds to address proactive intervention into gun violence. And it was my hope to have Pastor Peterson here today so he could share how in the city of Youngstown, how they work with their police department using those search and seizure dollars to fund intervention, support grassroots organizations that do that type of intervention throughout the community. But he wasn't able to make it. So again, to summarize my question, how much is in the search and seizure account? What's being done with the investment dollars that are coming from that? And please, don't give me the blanket answer. It's going into the general fund so we can balance our budget.
Any other questions or comments?
That's not on that particular, the search and seizure, although I understand the conversation, isn't part of their special meeting requests.
Councilman Neal?
Madam Chair, I wrote out the agenda. I spoke about this at the last meeting. That's what's in there. That's what the intent is. When it says proactive intervention, the funding source for that is the search and seizure dollars. That was spoke. Yes. That's the funding source for that. None of the funding sources on here are identified. None of the funding sources are identified. But when I spoke about this last week, that's what the issue was. That's how that was going to be funded, through those dollars. There's a funding source identified for each one.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on item number 3? If not, we're going to move into item number 4, funding to renew and restore City Council's membership, Ohio Municipal League. Councilman Neal, do you have anything further on that?
Madam Chair, hopefully each member received the letter from Mr. Kent Scarrett, Executive Director of the Ohio Municipal League. Mr. Chair, Madam Clerk, Madam Chair, can we have the clerk read the letter, or are we going to leave it to the...
I mean, I don't think it's necessary for the clerk to read it. I mean, everyone has a copy, correct? And if
Okay.
not, we can get them one.
Well, I would like to read this first paragraph.
Okay.
Okay. It says, the Ohio Municipal League grants Ohio cities and villages access to policymakers, specialized programs, and educational opportunities with a membership of 750 Ohio cities and villages. Our organization is dedicated to advocating on behalf of those municipalities across the state, as well as connecting them to associations, training, programs, and an array of service programs accessible through the Ohio Municipal League Service Corporation. Members with the League connects local officials with the latest information on issues being considered within state government and directly impact the administration of our cities and villages. The League alerts members of opportunities to testify before legislative committees, grants access to exclusive webinar and conference opportunities, and makes members eligible for membership and leadership roles within the National League of Cities. And in the next paragraph, as it reads through this, again, this is the body that represents the legislative arm of government. There are associations for executive branch, for safety forces, for those that take care of the financial records, as well as the legal arm. This arm right here is for the legislative branch.
Any other comments or questions? Councilman Fusco?
I understand that the Ohio Municipal League has been leaning more towards smaller cities in terms of advocating. And as a matter of fact, I know Mr. Hardy has some information in reference to some of that movement of late.
Councilman,
Mr. Hardy?
I mean, Mr.
I
Hardy?
would like to ask him to...
But it's okay, Mr. Hardy. It's okay, Mr. Hardy. It's okay.
Thank you, Madam President. So, as I was talking about in the last, in the budget here, or budget meeting, excuse me, budget committee, it's the administration's position that that the Ohio Municipal League has, over the last several years, moved in a position, because its membership is made up mostly by small cities and villages, it doesn't carry the same legislative agenda in Columbus or in the, that we hold as a large urban city. And again, as Director Miller-Dawson said, and I asked council office to produce this, and they did, we had a discussion this year, calendar year 2019, as a group about the citywide memberships we were going to undertake. And we had that conversation about OML. And the concern was raised at that time, and I think I said something very similar to what I'm saying now, is that we don't feel they represent large cities in Ohio any longer. But we had the discussion, and interestingly, that piece of legislation passed 13-0 to not fund the Ohio Municipal League in 2019. So again, we made our position clear to council, but ultimately it was council's decision as to whether or not it was going to support that decision, and council voted 13-0 to not include the Ohio Municipal League in this year's memberships.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. I appreciate that reminder. In February, this council voted 13-0 based on the fact that OML no longer looks out for the interest of bigger cities in the state of Ohio due to the fact of the State House and et cetera. It's really should be no surprise to us that there is this division. There shouldn't be a surprise here. So and we've already made a statement, this council has 13-0, and within the budget, there's not money for it. So therefore, I assume, Mr. Fricker, that if in fact we would like to fund these guys, we'd have to find the money somewhere.
Okay, thank you so much. I think I saw Councilman Sims. Did you have your hand up?
Because I'm going to submit to an earlier comment my colleague made about possible ignorance, because I'd like to read just the last paragraph of this that I wasn't aware of. Critically, League members allow local officials to fully engage in programs and advocacy efforts offered through the National League of Cities. The National Municipal Advocacy Organization offers local leaders extensive and timely information through conferences, webinars, weekly newsletter, and extensive research studies. OML membership allows local leaders to fully engage with this critical federal advocacy group by making them eligible to participate in NLC's committees and leadership roles on a national platform. Participation on committees and eligibility to leadership opportunities is only made possible by being a member of the Ohio Municipal League. Now, that part I wasn't aware of. I know that in this body, we have members who are on national boards and committees rated to NLC. So now, again, back to the point my colleague made earlier, as this being the body in which we as legislators look to for best practices, I guess I'm a bit taken aback that we have opportunities on the national level to speak about some of these issues that are critical, like race, equity, and leadership, and we are represented there, but now that is now being compromised because we don't have membership in the Ohio Municipal League. Is that correct?
Mr. Hardy?
So that is not correct.
Okay.
The issue is that you cannot become an officer of the National League of Cities, meaning president, vice president, second vice, I don't know all the different positions. You can serve on leadership committees, you can serve as chair of the committee, but you can't become president of the National League of Cities without being a member of your state league. However, I know it's come up many times this afternoon about an ignorance around this original piece of legislation. But let me be clear, there was a conversation at that time where I said almost exactly the same thing I'm saying today about our position. There was a conversation. There was no withholding of information. Council was free to research it, look it up, see what they felt, and voice their opinion at that time. And this body voted 13-0 to not fund that membership. If this body decides that it wants to change that, it can. But we have been completely transparent in our belief that the Ohio Municipal League no longer speaks for large urban cities in the state of Ohio. But you're right, council can choose to do something different, but it chose not to proceed in February.
Can I just follow up, Madam Chair?
Yes, Councilman Sims?
If I had known, again, I'll attribute it to my own personal ignorance around its connection to the prohibition for officers, because I know even my colleague, Terry Moses Santos, ran for vice president, and that's a big deal at the national level. Not to be afforded that opportunity at a time where there's a clarion call around some of these issues, particularly some of the ones we talked about here today, is a bit troubling to me. And I think had I been aware, and I would think that even as you brought the information, if in fact we talked about that, I don't recall that.
If I may, Madam President.
Yes, Mr. Hardy?
Okay, Madam Chair, I was kind of finished.
Are you still going on your remarks? Okay, go ahead.
Ma'am. So if you're saying that we said this would now make this body ineligible to hold offices at the National League of Cities, at the national level, I didn't hear that. And so if you're saying that, I missed that.
Okay, Mr. Hardy?
So it's totally council's call. Council can choose to if there's a willingness here to rejoin OML, that's fine, but an issue, here is a clear and present example of how the OML no longer serves this city very well, an issue you yourself are passionate about, 5G technology and making sure it's equitable. The largest mayors in the state were ready and still are ready to sue the state over the preemption legislation that the state pushed through on behalf of the big telecoms. And the Ohio Municipal League sold out and took a deal and withdrew their opposition so that the small townships and villages could have what they wanted. That is not representative of our needs. That's why we put forward in an open, honest dialogue that we didn't think a membership to the Ohio Municipal League served us well. But ultimately, it was council's call, and it still is ultimately council's call. However, at this point, to Councilman Fusco's point, We have made the budget accordingly because of that February vote. So there is not, and they upped it this year, be $14,642 to be a member of the Ohio Municipal League. That we would have to find somewhere in the budget.
So, Councilwoman Samples first, and then I'll come back to you, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will tell you, I met with Kent and one of his assistants while I was at National League of Cities a couple weeks ago. I'm concerned because I will admit Ohio Municipal League has done nothing for us. They never send us anything about invites. You never know what's going on unless you actually take it upon yourself to look. I never knew that they were so interconnected with NLC. Even when voting on that, I voted under the understanding that Ohio Municipal League does nothing for City Council. That was my vote. Now, I read this letter. Some of these things he did not explain or express to me when I met with him in D.C. I met with him on 3 different occasions. When I first got there, and I met with his assistant and him, and then I met with him with Councilman Neal. Councilman Matt Zone, who is the immediate past president of National League of Cities and a councilman in Cleveland, I sent him a copy of this letter because I wanted to know how this was going to affect us. And again, just in October of 2017, I ran for the board of directors as vice president. Unbeknownst to me, there's this interconnection between the two. I sit on 2 of their major committees for NLC. This affects me greatly, and I didn't know until he just texted me and said it's partly correct. It will be impossible to be elected to the board of directors or be an officer if your city is not a member of the state league. Although you could participate fully in any other conferences, constituency groups, and workshops at NLC, you will no longer be eligible. That's a concern for me.
Thank you. And before, I know we have a couple other people. Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
How do we figure out a way to be involved, but not at such a costly manner? It's like if the administration doesn't want to be a part of that, but the council does, why do they have to be connected? If they don't want to be, I mean, they honestly haven't done anything for us. I'll be the first to admit that. I've never got anything about a meeting. This is the first time I've ever met this guy when we canceled. So how do we stay involved so we have our participation on the NLC side, but we're giving them money for us to stay involved on the NLC side, and that concerns me. But I don't want to lose an opportunity to advance, whether it's myself, Councilwoman Amobian or Neal, or whomever goes, because we're being penalized because of what another organization is not doing for us. So I don't know. If we look into that, see how that works, I don't know. I didn't know they ran collectively together. If the administration doesn't want to be involved, then that cancels all of us out. It just seems a little odd that they would have us run together when we're 2 separate branches of government. Okay. So I don't know if that's something we can look into. I don't know.
We can. Is there anyone else that has not spoken yet on this topic that would like to? If not, I'm going to go to Councilman Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few things I'd like to highlight. $14,000. We just gave $35,000 to the Drew Joyce basketball tournament. Good cause. Good cause. We gave 35. Okay. But this is so that we, as legislators, can have access to tools to understand how to do our job to the fullest. That's the first thing. The second thing is I had a conversation with Councilman Jeff Wilhite and talked about, because he reached out to me and said, Russ, I'm concerned, is it true that Akron is no longer part of the Ohio Municipal League? I said, yeah, that's true. And he expressed great concern. And I'm not going to share what he shared to me. I've shared it with some of my colleagues why we dropped out, because he shared something with me that I didn't even know. But I would like to ask him to come and speak, and I think it may be good to even have Kent come to speak about the importance of being a part of the league. More and more, we have legislation coming in here where we're doing stuff in conjunction with the county. In my conversation with Councilman Wilhite, because I didn't know he was president of county council now, I said, you know, we need to have a caucus under county council with all of the city councils that fall within county council, since we're sharing resources, so that we have an understanding. Because I share with him, I am not for regional government. but I am for regional collaboration. And he said, you know, that's right. And he broke down the number of ways that the Ohio Municipal League can assist us in that practice. So first thing, you know, I would feel more comfortable if I knew that as a collective body, we had access to training to improve our understanding on how to govern. But we don't. And this is the outside of NLC, which is basically twice a year unless you're part of another committee. This is the only local body that we have access to, unless there's another one, someone tell me. And as we have had discussion here just today about not understanding the difference between equity, diversity, and inclusion, not having a full understanding of our budget and our role as council to allocate funds. I mean, when dollars come in, the administration can't just say they're going here. That has to come. The glaring one that comes to mind is the workers' comp rebate check that we got for $1.2 million.
So, Councilman, just make sure you stay on topic.
I am staying on topic, ma'am, about the importance of best practices that help us understand how to do our job. So the importance of this league is first, the administration has the right to do whatever the administration wants to do, but they can't tell this body what to do. And I raised objection. When that came in, I raised objection. And Mr. Hardy, as we have said before, this thing called trust is wearing very thin when it comes to where you ask for things and then, you know, things are shoved or pushed through. This body should have had full understanding of the ramifications of a decision. None of us said it wasn't to our advantage. Everyone on council may not take it, but I know the understanding that I've gotten on how to be a legislator has not come from just sitting in this chamber. It's come from going to training and being educated on how to do best practice.
Mr. Hardy, did you have something in response to Councilman Neal?
I would just add that, again, no one was trying to hide or push anything on this particular piece. We were completely transparent then, as we are now, on our feelings about the Ohio Municipal League. You did voice your concerns and then voted yes to not fund them for 2019. It is ultimately up to all of us if we need to change our minds. But for the record, there was no intent to do anything but bring forth our best ideas. And here's the thing, that's what we do. The mayor prepares a budget, submits it to council. We just went through an entire month of hearings, hours and hours and hours of hearings, and then council decides whether or not we're going to pass it. The same thing happens at the state level, and the same thing happens at the federal level. So when I say we voiced our opinion, that's what we did, and then ultimately, council votes, and it did. If it chooses to change that, that is totally its prerogative, but there was no intent to deceive or not provide information or not provide time for folks to think about their vote.
Thank you. Councilwoman Sims?
So I get often in trouble about how we drop these bombs and just leave them there. I'm not suggesting in any shape, form, or fashion that you meant to be deceptive. What I submit to you is that I didn't know those things were interconnected. And so now, and it was, I think Mr. Neal used the term our ignorance that may be the cause of that. I am quite sure I would have been very, very reluctant if those things would definitely have to be married. Because I do, again, believe that it is critically important in light of all of what's happening at the local levels and across this country, that we have a voice. And I think it's an honor and a blessing to have a voice at the national level on these very important issues that affect many of the daily lives of our residents. So I know we have the capacity, it's if we have the wherewithal to look and try to find the resources. I know it because, you know, in crisis, we do that. We found an additional $250,000, I believe, after we looked at the issues we had with the snow challenge most recently, because there's a need. All we're submitting here today is that this is a need, and perhaps we need to, now that we understand better, revisit that. And to Councilwoman Sample's recommendation, perhaps there is a way that we can, as a legislative body, still remain connected without forcing the administration, who doesn't appear to be benefiting from our $13,000 membership. So if we could even explore that, I would certainly support that, but I would be uncomfortable if we didn't revisit that in light of the new information that we have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In respect to time, we're going to go on to the last topic, which is funding an online budget tool. I know which has had much conversation around this horseshoe. Councilman Neal, any brief comments on this?
Madam Chair, just from the fact of going through this last budget process, and again, even now, the need for us to have a tool to be able to understand, because like, we had a $7 million shortfall that we had to sell cell towers for. Now, the paper has documented several times that we've got a $6.5 million shortfall in state funding, both the Beacon Journal and the Plain Dealer. Mr. Fricker says that that is not the case. That's, I'd like to get clarification, because this is the point. I still can't tell you, and maybe my colleagues can, Ms. Sims spoke about the $250,000 that we found for snow and ice. Where did we take that from? Where did it come from? How did it impact our overall budget?
Mr. Fricker can let you know.
Yeah. So as I recall, the $250,000 was reallocated from the streets portion of the Issue 4 money. It was previously dedicated towards the concrete restoration program, and it was reallocated towards the snow and ice equipment. It wasn't an additional $250,000 that was added in to fund those items. It was reallocated from money that had already been appropriated.
Yes, sir. I didn't say it was additional. Even the reallocation means that now that means that we do, now that we do more over here, we do less over here. And it's for this council to have an understanding of, when we make those kind of decisions, how it impacts the overall budget. Again, so like you said, we've already gone around this. If this council feels comfortable, and I tell my colleagues, I don't feel comfortable being able to stand before them talking about $1 billion budget and have full understanding of how we're utilizing the resources to the best of the ability. And I'm extremely concerned after this conversation today when I find out that we're relying on credit card rebates to balance our budget. That's the concern. And so a tool that allows us to see when we take from pot A and put it in pot B, how it impacts our overall budget, because that means that those are fewer roads that we're going to be able to do. If we take dollars from one thing, that's less that we can do somewhere else. It's troubling.
Mr. Fricker?
One of the things I would point out is we keep identifying these small funding sources and attempt to allocate them towards items that you wish to fund within the budget. What I would like to point out is the funding that we have lost over the past 8 years. So while those credit card rebates have brought in approximately $100,000 a year, keep in mind what we have lost in state funding. Those, if you look at the last 3 years, I did some calculations here. The last 3 years, the net annual loss from the phase out of the tangible personal property tax, the loss, the reduction of the local government fund, and the loss of the inheritance tax, that's about $19.4 million over the last 3 years. The credit card rebates generated $329,000 over the last 3 years. That makes up 1.7% of that loss in state funding. So yes, we are using all of our available resources to fund the budget items that we're funding within this general fund budget. We rely on, these small miscellaneous revenues, which by themselves seem small, but when you add up, if you look at your budget overview, the miscellaneous revenue items is still $3.8 million, and all of those little items add up to being able to fund police officers, firefighters, equipment operators, So yes, we rely on those small items to fund our overall general fund budget.
Councilman Fusco?
Thank you. This is, we're talking about how to fund items and so on and so forth, for the budgeting process or something. I thought we were here to talk about this balancing act. That's what was in the correspondence, I believe. Just ask that we stick to that piece. This council is a budgeting tool for this council. This council voted on it 5 times so far, and it just seems as though that we've made a stance on it. So
Okay.
it seemed to make sense to continue this.
We're just going to ask Councilman Neal if you can just give us concluding remarks, and then we're going to adjourn.
I will. Again, this right here does not request funding for Balancing Act. As it reads, it says funding for an online interactive budgeting tool to assist council in understanding and setting the city's complex budget, and to help us engage and communicate with the citizens of Akron regarding the city's budget priorities. It says nothing about budgeting act. It's about us setting aside dollars to have a funding tool. Right now, all we have are sheets of paper. And to close this out, Mr. Fricker spoke very well about the challenges that the city has. But if anybody's been reading the paper, in this last Sunday, it talked about the challenges that our citizens have and the tax revenues that are coming in. We've been saying that the citizens of Akron, the average income is $33,000. That's not true. Most of our communities are, within the city of Akron's limits, are under $20,000. And we're trying to balance our budget on their backs. So I understand that the city has hard times. Every city has. But when I talk to our constituents in other cities, they're finding money for proactive intervention on gun violence and youth violence. They're establishing equity policies. They're doing these things. Everybody has to work on a tight dollar. The challenge with this council is, with the information that we're finding, how are we going to govern this city with neighborhoods that do not have the economic resources like they did in the past? They're being taxed by the same entity that is taking money away from us, which is the state. And so, from just some of the things that we've talked about, it says, it talks about the importance of us collaborating. That's what happens when you're a part of a municipal league. It's an official structure for communities to collaborate. And if you read it, it talked about Akron's brand and one of the main concerns being crime and people moving out of our city because of crime. If we can't, those of us that are on the front line, if we don't have tools to engage our constituents and give them resources to be able to mentor and minister to young people in our community, police will never be the answer. You know why? Because they always respond to an event after it already happened. We need to be proactive and intervene ahead of time. So, Madam Chair, this was brought before council so that we could identify some things to give us the tools to be able to do our job in working with our constituents. I had hoped that I would have access to plug in to show us the city of Cleveland, where their city council under each committee has a strategic goal, and they outline what their goals and objectives are for the year. For this council, what are our strategic goals and objectives for the year? What do we collectively as a legislative body, how do we hope to address the needs and concerns of our constituents? And if we can't communicate that to each other, if we don't have an understanding, how in the world are we going to be able to communicate it or even act on it with our constituents? That's it, Madam Chair.
Okay, motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
You have one last comment. Thank you so much, Councilwoman Sims.
Madam Chair, unfortunately, my numbers were misnumbered, so I thought we were on 3, and 3 looks different than the 3 it's on there. So just wanted to make a brief comment. We all received the report today on the Youth Violence Prevention Preliminary Strategy Plan. It's probably been a preliminary for quite some time. So this even speaks more to the point of being clear on what our strategies are, what resources we earmarked. If you have the report before you, it talks about Akron's history, recent youth violence prevention. And it talks about the Save a Life Coalition. I actually created that Save a Life Coalition along with, at the time, Deputy Chief Brown. So this is back in 2011, 2012. So the whole idea of having resources or really devising a plan is not a new one. So if my passions are real, if my passions are very apparent, they are, because I ain't new to this, I'm true to this. And so I've been at this a long time. Matter of fact, it was my group that brought the issue of gun violence before this administration that resulted in the creation of the Youth Violence Coalition. But that was specifically talking about youth. We're talking about an overall gun violence plan. This plan in particular is just looking at gun violence interruption between the ages of 15 and 24. I submit to you that it's a bigger issue than that. That's why we need a plan. So again, take time to read this plan, but this is just a small piece. I still believe that we need an overall plan for dealing with gun violence in our community, and that we need to earmark resources accordingly. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Motion for adjournment? Seeing no objections, we're adjourned.